Dance like a jellyfish, dance like a jellyfish. Say goodbye to those smelly fish and dance like a jellyfish. Okay, sorry. Just getting warmed up there. The theme of today is about seeing the unseen, and certainly jellyfish, not only because they're invisible, but because we just don't think about them, are in many ways a real test of our ability and willingness to see the unseen. Most of us, when we think of jellyfish, we think of their stings because that's the part that we encounter. But there's a whole nother side of jellyfish that most people have no idea, but we need to because they're making a difference to our ecosystems, to our way of life. So I hope to share a little bit of that with you today. The species that I just showed you, Catastylus, is absolutely stunning when it's by itself like that in an aquarium, but when it's in huge numbers, it can actually cause a lot of problems, and many jellyfish are exactly the same way. The USS Ronald Reagan was built to be America's newest, largest, most expensive nuclear-powered aircraft supercarrier. It was built to withstand anything that any nation's military or any act of nature could hurl at it. But there was one thing that the engineers didn't plan for, and that was Catastylus. On its first stop of its maiden voyage, the USS Ronald Reagan sucked in thousands of Catastylus into the pumps that for the cooling water for the engines, and actually shut down the ship. It had to be evacuated and everything. This was in Brisbane. So this might seem like a fairly quirky thing, and we can laugh about it because America's biggest, largest ship being disabled by jellyfish, but it happens a lot more than you'd think it does. Okay, let's go back to the 1980s. Believe it or not, this is me in 1981, back when I was young and beautiful and adventurous. Just a couple of months after that picture was taken of me belly dancing, I took part in a peaceful demonstration where we blockaded Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in California, and 1,900 people were arrested blockading this power plant. I was one of them, and it was the largest act of civil disobedience in American history. Skip ahead a couple of decades, and I began working with jellyfish at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium in Los Angeles. Started out just feeding and cleaning, but then I got interested in a little bit of research. And this beautiful species, Aurelia, was my subject that I was working with. And my studies showed that it wasn't actually the species that everybody thought it was, but it had actually been named and classified 175 years earlier, and then through some confusion and whatever, it got ignored, and we thought it was this European species. So I corrected the classification and gave it its rightful name back. Aurelia labiata was its name. And, to this day, it's still recognized with that name and hopefully into perpetuity. But in very large numbers, it can cause all kinds of problems. Imagine my surprise in 2008. Imagine my surprise in 2008 when I opened up my morning paper. By now, I'm living and working in Australia. I'm 1,000,000 miles away from Aurelia. I'm 1,000,000 miles away from nuclear power plants. But right there in my morning paper, a story that Aurelia labiata, my species, got sucked into the intake pipes of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant and shut it down for 3 days. Yay, go jellyfish! So imagine how proud I was as Aurelia's mother. But seriously, that's one of the weirdest coincidences of my life, for sure. Now, this photo isn't Aurelia labiata, and it isn't Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, but this is what it would have looked like on the day. All of those blue things and white things, those are all jellyfish, and squillions of them. This happens a lot. Power plants, desalination plants, air conditioning systems, water-cooled data centers, you name it. If something's sucking in water, chances are it's having problems with jellyfish. So jellyfish are causing all kinds of problems, not just to nuclear power plants and ships and things like that, but from Florida to the Philippines, from Ireland to Thailand, from the Mediterranean to Melbourne. Jellyfish are causing problems and costing millions and millions and billions of dollars in losses to a whole bunch of different industries. Everything from killing salmon to capsizing fishing trawlers to clogging up fishing trawl nets to stinging tourists to even stinging racehorses. It's unbelievable the damage that jellyfish are causing in many, many places around the world. Now, what you see here is a quarry in Wisconsin, and these horseshoe-shaped imprints are jellyfish fossils. And there's many, many of them in this quarry. It's actually a bloom of jellyfish that stranded and fossilized together. And as remarkable as it is for jellyfish to fossilize at all, imagine how remarkable it is for a jellyfish bloom to fossilize. But what's even more remarkable is this quarry has 7 consecutive bedding planes of fossilized jellyfish blooms stacked on top of one another, like the pages in a history book. And what this history book tells us is that jellyfish have been blooming for a long time. About 500 million years ago, these fossils were laid down. So they've been blooming for a long time, and it is, to some extent, just what jellyfish do, particularly when they're given the right circumstances. Part of the way that jellyfish do all of this weird blooming stuff is they have this weird life cycle. It's not like anything else we can imagine. The jellyfish that we see is just part of the life cycle. When that jellyfish has babies, they don't grow up to look like jellyfish. They grow up to look like little tiny sea anemones or like little hydras. And those little polyps clone and clone and clone and make tons of replicates of themselves. And then when the conditions are right, those polyps bud off baby jellyfish. And those baby jellyfish are hungry and they eat a lot and they grow fast. And then that's when we get these blooms that we see. When we think of weeds, we normally think of dandelions and things like that, maybe cockroaches, but probably plants. But jellyfish, in many ways, are the ultimate weed. They've not only got that really weird life cycle, but they also can clone in 13 different ways. Come on, you gotta admire something that can clone in 13 different ways. That's pretty amazing. They don't even need to see to eat. They just catch whatever's on their tentacles. They don't even need to eat. If they don't have any food available, they just slowly degrow. And then when the conditions are right, they start eating again and they grow again. No harm done. They're happy. They're incredibly able to withstand just about any temperature, from freezing to way hotter than we would feel comfortable being in the water. They can withstand incredible ranges in salinity. And one species, at least, is truly biologically immortal. True. It actually, when it dies, instead of decaying away and disintegrating and becoming nothing, the cells actually reaggregate and form new polyps, and they start over again and start budding off more jellyfish. True, bizarre. There's this incredible diversity and abundance of jellyfish out in the oceans, about 2,500 species. And some of them are incredibly beautiful, but don't be fooled by their beauty and their simplicity. These guys are really good at surviving. They've had over 500 million years at improving how they survive, and they're really good at it. And we're giving them the context to do it even more. part of how they survive so well and part of how they do what they do that isn't good for us has to do with how they prey on their food sources. So jellyfish eat the eggs and larvae of fish, and they eat the plankton that those larvae would eat. So this double whammy of predation and competition, it enables jellyfish to absolutely cut off an ecosystem at the ankles and keep it down. And so even all of these things that we're seeing with the power plants and the ships and killing fish and all of that, stinging tourists, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real problem with jellyfish is what they're doing to the ecosystems through this double whammy of predation and competition. And there's another thing that jellyfish do that's quite interesting, I think. Now, we normally think of the food chain in very linear terms. So, big things eat little things, and fast things eat slow things, and smart things eat stupid things. And there's a order to the food chain, a pecking order, if you will. But jellyfish kind of flip that upside down. Now, they do this normally, but when they're not in huge numbers, it's not that big of a deal. When they're in huge numbers, it's a really big deal. So what they do is, by eating the eggs and larvae of species higher on the food chain than themselves, they are cutting down that food chain, but they're also sequestering that higher energy food source into their own low energy bodies. And they're actually simplifying the ecosystems in doing this. So jellyfish are the visible indicator that something in the ocean is out of balance. Now, I'm reminded of our gardens. If we tend to the garden very well, then we have a productive garden with beautiful flowers and maybe vegetables and lovely plants. But if we let the garden go, then all hell breaks loose, and it's a battle between the weeds, and the weedier weeds take over from the less weedy weeds, and it becomes this crazy weed-eat-weed world almost. And this is kind of what's happening with jellyfish. By the time the ecosystem is at that place where jellyfish are taking over, it's a pretty sad state indeed. So they do this in a number of, there's a number of things that we're doing that are enabling them to do this. For one thing, we're transporting them around the world in ballast water of ships. We're taking out their predators and competitors by fishing. Coastal construction has emerged as a very weird, unexpected thing where the jellyfish polyps prefer artificial surfaces to settle on. So all of the oil and gas rigs, ports, all of those things are making it worse. Eutrophication is just a fancy word for too many nutrients. Maybe it's from sewage outfalls, maybe it's from farm fertilizers, whatever, but it changes the water chemistry to hold less oxygen, and then fish have a harder time surviving, and jellyfish are the last man standing. So too with pollution and climate change and ocean acidification, where these sort of things don't generally affect the jellyfish so much, but they affect the predators and competitors of jellyfish, and they're the last man standing, and this is what we're seeing in many places. So I'm reminded of the story of the Sorcerers Apprentice, which of course was more recently made famous in Disney's Fantasia. And the story goes something like this. The sorcerer leaves some chores for the apprentice to do. And so the apprentice is he's supposed to fill a cistern with water. And he's doing that, but he gets a little bit lazy, and so he casts a spell on the broom to fetch the water for him. And pretty soon, the broom is fetching so much water and slopping it around and overfilling the cistern and whatever, and the apprentice realizes that he needs to stop the broom, but he doesn't know the spell to stop the broom. So he gets a hatchet and he chops the broom into a lot of pieces, and each of those pieces becomes another broom under the spell and begins carrying more water, and pretty soon it gets totally out of hand. Now, in the story, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the sorcerer comes back just in the nick of time, casts the spell to stop the broom from doing it, and saves the day. The problem is, we don't have a sorcerer that's going to come back in and stop what we're doing. We don't have a fix for the damage that we're doing to our ecosystems. The ocean is our life support system. It's where we get our food, it's where we get our oxygen, it's where we get our recreation, many, many industries. We need the oceans to be healthy, and we don't have a fix for the damage that we're doing. But I submit to you, we do have a choice into how rapidly we let it degrade and how far we're willing to let it go. Thank you.